The Dodge City Affair, Grady Hart, Episode 1, by Sevastian. The wind ripped across the open plains like an animal, a deep, hungry thing, clawing at the earth and howling its fury. Dust swirled in violent eddies, scraping against the old wooden buildings of Dodge City as if it wanted to tear them down to splinters. It was 1874, and the railroad slashed across the land like an iron serpent, promising fortune and chaos in equal measure. Men bled into the dirt for a chance of power, while the rest watched the horizon, waiting for it to swallow them whole. And in the center of it all, Grady Hart rode into town, haunted by the year that had been stolen from him. Grady had always been a man who controlled his destiny, or so he thought. Sharp-eyed, calculating, always 2 steps ahead of the game. But now, he was drowning in a sea of shadows. A year of his life had vanished, erased from his memory as cleanly as if someone had taken a knife to it. He could remember the smallest details of everything before and after, but that year was nothing but a dark, yawning pit. And no matter how hard he tried to claw back that lost time, it remained buried beneath the weight of his growing despair. He felt the storm brewing long before he saw the clouds. Dark and ominous, it rolled over the plains, lightning crackling like the sound of bones breaking in the distance. His horse, Crow, a tall bay with a sleek, almost raven black coat, snorted as they reached the edge of Dodge City. The air was heavy, thick with the promise of violence, and Grady could feel it crawling under his skin. The railroad had cut Dodge in two, a raw, bleeding wound through the town. Men gathered around it like scavengers, rail workers, gamblers, and drifters, all waiting for something to snap. And Grady knew who would pull the trigger on that something. Sam Redden. Redden was a viper, coiled and waiting to strike. Grady had crossed paths with him before, and each time Redden had slipped through his fingers like smoke. A master manipulator, Redden had a way of charming people into doing his dirty work without them realizing they'd sold their souls in the process. Now Redden was in Dodge, whispering promises into the ears of the desperate man who had come to work on the railroad, riling them up, readying them for bloodshed. He didn't care about gold or land. He wanted control, to be the man pulling the strings in a town that didn't even know it was being puppeted. Grady's boots hit the ground outside the saloon with a dull thud, dust rising around him like the ghost that haunted his every step. Eyes followed him as he pushed through the bat-wing doors, but Grady barely noticed. The dim interior smelled of whiskey, sweat, and old secrets. But he wasn't here for any of that. He was here for Jonas Drake. Jonas stood at the bar, his back straight, his frame rigid. He was tall, lean, with eyes that never blinked. Those eyes unnerved people, made them shift in their seats, made them reconsider their choices. The darkness in him was like a storm cloud, heavy and brooding, waiting to unleash hell. He and Grady had ridden through fire together, but Jonas wasn't the same man he used to be, not since Redding had taken Claire, Jonas's sister. Grady slid onto the stool next to him, the wood creaking under his weight. He didn't speak right away, waiting for the tension between them to stretch tight like a wire. "You find him?" Grady's voice was low, like a growl barely restrained. Jonas didn't turn. His fingers drummed once on the bar, then stilled. "He's out at the camp, stirring 'em up. They're ready." Grady clenched his jaw, feeling the anger rise like bile. God damn it, we're always a step behind him. Jonas's fingers flexed, brushing the butt of his gun. "We're not behind yet, not while Claire's still in his grasp." That was the truth of it. Redding had taken Claire, using her as leverage against Jonas, knowing full well that her life was the only thing keeping Jonas from burning the entire town to the ground. Grady had seen it in his friend's eyes, the cold, empty look of a man who had nothing left to lose but the person he cared about most. "You think he's going to light the match tonight?" Grady asked,
though he already knew the answer. The air was electric with the tension of men waiting to kill or be killed.
Jonas turned his head just slightly, enough for Grady to catch the edge of his gaze. Tonight, and if we don't stop him, this whole place burns.
Grady nodded, the weight of it settling deep into his bones. Then we finish this.
The railroad camp lay just beyond the town, a sprawling mess of tents and fires that stretched out under the darkening sky. The men there were restless, their faces grim, hard with desperation. They clutched their rifles like lifelines, their tempers short, their nerves frayed by long hours and the poison Redding had been feeding them.
Jonas rode beside Grady, his posture stiff, his hand never far from the gun at his side. Grady could see the storm building in his friend, the rage, the fear, all tangled together like a live wire, sparking just beneath the surface. Jonas was barely holding himself together. Claire was the only thing tethering him to sanity, and Grady knew that once they took Redding down, that thread would snap.
As they approached the camp, a figure emerged from the shadows, stumbling towards them. It was Claire. Her face was pale, her dress torn, her eyes wide with terror. Grady's gut twisted as she stumbled into Jonas's arms, her voice a whisper of panic. "He's inside," she gasped, her breath ragged. "He's gonna start the fight tonight. You have to stop him." Jonas's face didn't change, didn't show the storm that was tearing him apart inside. But Grady saw the way his hand tightened on his gun, the way his body tensed like a predator ready to strike. "Where is he?" Jonas's voice was a knife edge, cold and sharp. "In the big tent," Claire said, her voice trembling. "He's waiting." Grady knew they were already too late. The match was struck, the fire was coming. There was no stopping the fight now. "Jonas," Grady urged, biting into his words, "we end this now." Jonas didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the tent in the distance, his mind set on one thing: Sam Redding. The air was thick inside the big tent, suffocating. The smell of sweat and gunpowder clung to everything, heavy and rancid. Redding stood at the center, his arms crossed, his grin a twisted mix of cruelty and confidence. Around him, the workers sat in a circle, their rifles cradled in their hands, their eyes fixed on their leader like wolves waiting for the kill. Grady and Jonas stepped into the tent, the air crackling with tension. For a moment, the world seemed to slow, the flickering firelight casting wild shadows across the scene. Redding's eyes landed on him, and his grin widened. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with amusement. "Look who finally decided to join the party." Grady's hand hovered near his gun. "It ends tonight, Redding." Redding's grin darkened, a chuckle rumbling from his throat. "Oh, it'll end tonight, all right, but not the way you think." Jonas stepped forward, his eyes like two black holes, void of emotion. "You're not walking out of here." For a moment, just a fraction of a second, Redding's grin faltered, but it came back, sharper. "I already have." And then the first shot rang out. Chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the air, deafening and furious. Grady moved on instinct, his revolver drawn, firing into the maelstrom. Bullets whizzed past his head. Men shouted. The canvas of the tent caught fire, flames licking up the sides, turning the place into a furnace. But Grady wasn't focused on the battle. His eyes were on Jonas. Jonas moved with terrifying precision, his gun steady, his eyes locked on Redding. Every shot he fired was deliberate, every step calculated. Redding was backing away, panic replacing the smug confidence that had once lined his face. He fired wildly, desperate to escape. Jonas didn't flinch. He stalked forward, relentless and unblinking, as Redding stumbled and fell.
Redding's back hit the ground hard, blood blooming from his chest, his face pale with shock. He tried to speak, his lips forming words, but they were drowned out by the chaos around them.
Jonas stood over him, his gun still raised, his eyes as empty as the night. He didn't say a word. The look on his face said it all. The final shot rang out, and Sam Redding's life ended.
Dawn crept over Dodge City, the fires extinguished, the town eerily quiet. The railroad camp was deserted, the men scattered like dust in the wind. The violence had passed, but the weight of it lingered, heavy in the air.
Grady stood at the edge of town, watching the sun rise. Jonas was gone, not dead, but hollowed out by his vengeance. Revenge had taken everything from him, leaving nothing but an empty shell. As Grady mounted Crow and rode out of Dodge, the missing years still gnawed at him, a wound that wouldn't heal. Somewhere in that void was the answer he sought.
He wasn't done searching. The fight was far from over.